The Great Karoo, or Land of Thirst, is a vast area in the heartland of South Africa. A haunting, biblical landscape that seems to sweep on forever. It's an area of intense beauty and infinite variety, one of the world's great natural wonders. This is a part of South Africa least touched by the passing of time, offering the traveller an encounter with a rich tapestry of people and places. A world that existed more than 200 million years ago. It was through the study of Karoo fossils in the early years of the 20th century that scientific thought was influenced in acknowledging that mammals arose from reptiles. And as every one of us is a living fossil, containing within our genes the secrets of our ancestors, a journey into the Karoo is, in some respects, a voyage of self-discovery. A good place to start in search of prehistoric fossils is the farm Wellwood in the Graaf district. This museum, started by Dr. Sidney Rubidge, houses some of the most valuable specimens in the world. World-famous paleontologist Dr. Broom was greatly excited on seeing one specimen in particular, and that was the Milleretta. The Milleretta was the first well-preserved skull ever discovered of the group of reptiles that may have had as one of its members the ancestor of all mammal-like reptiles. To Broom, this skull was the seed of the mammal race. These prehistoric mammal-like reptiles left their mark in other ways too, such as visible footprints found at Sante, also in the Graaf district. This trackway was made by 6 dicynodonts, our earliest mammal-like reptiles, about 250 million years ago. They looked like baby hippos and trudged across the muddy plain, leaving behind their indelible print. A fascinating fossil trail has been created at the Karoo National Park near Beaufort West, where the whole story of how the Karoo rocks were formed and the fossils of some of the ancient animals of the Karoo are displayed. What is really fascinating is to think that at the time when these creatures roamed the Karoo, the continental landscape was very different. About 300 million years ago, Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia and India were all joined together into a single supercontinent known as Gondwanaland. Since the breakup of Gondwanaland some 150 million years ago, the Karoo rocks have been deeply eroded by rivers and streams, causing the ancient layers to become exposed on the surface, revealing the hidden fossils. People of Graaf often refer to their town as the ancient capital of Gondwanaland, as it seems to be in the center of all this antiquity. But in the time span of Gondwanaland, Graaf is not all that old. It was established as a village in 1786 by the governor of the Cape, Van der Graaf, who named it after himself and his wife, Cornelia Reinet. The Landrost, or magistrate, was a key figure in the life of the townsfolk. As we stayed in the building that once housed this esteemed individual and his staff, it's today a superb hotel with deep-rooted historical connections. Looking down the road is the former parsonage of the Dutch Reformed Church, which is best known for its association with the Reverend Andrew Murray and his son Charles, who later followed his father into the ministry. Scottish-born Andrew Murray was regarded as one of the greatest spiritual leaders in South Africa. The church was designed on similar lines to Salisbury Cathedral in England. Another historic highlight was the town's involvement in the Anglo-Boer War. At the Graaf Club, the second oldest in the country, boisterous members of the British Coldstream Guards left their mark on the bar counter when they pumped bullet holes into it. The patch marks bear permanent reminders. In order to protect the rail links against Boer guerrillas, the British built a number of blockhouses through the Karoo, such as this one at Beaufort West. Among the Boer heroes was Commandant Gideon Scheepers, who had entered the Cape Colony to recruit men for the Boer cause. The British engaged the rebels in skirmishing throughout the region, involving not only the Coldstream Guards, but also local cavalry regiments such as Nesbitt's Horse. Scheepers, the dynamic young Boer leader, was finally caught and brought to trial in Graaf. He was imprisoned in the local jail, a place that has retained its historical appearance. And this was the actual cell where he was held. Among other charges, Gideon Scheepers was found guilty of murder. The death sentence was read out in the town's public square. He was to be shot by firing squad. Tied to a chair with his grave dug behind him, he was shot just outside the town. After the execution, the British had his body exhumed and reburied elsewhere to avoid the site becoming a martyr's shrine. A statue to Commandant Scheepers, under the symbolic protection of the legendary General de Wet, stands on private property, as the authorities of the day refused to allow it on any public grounds. Another hero to come out of this town was the founder of the Pan-Africanist Congress, Mangaliso Sobukwe, a gentle, humble, deeply religious man with a keen intellect. Sobukwe was one of the main sources of inspiration for the black consciousness movement that developed in the 1970s under Steve Biko. Sobukwe's old school, run from this Methodist church, also saw its share of violence during the liberation struggle of the 80s. It was this outbuilding attached to his humble home in the township that he used as a study. After his arrest, Sobukwe, like Mandela, was imprisoned on Robben Island. He died in 1978 and is buried in Graaf. In the early part of the 19th century, many of the voortrekkers, those Boer farmers who wanted to live beyond the reach of British rule and find better economic and grazing conditions to the north, set off from here on the Great Trek. Among leaders of the group from the Graaf district was Andries Pretorius. Times were tough for these early pioneers, and many of them died along the way. About halfway between Graaf and Aberdeen is this isolated grave of a voortrekker woman who is said to have died during the Great Trek. The husband then buried her and fenced the grave with their marriage bed. Another unusual gravesite in the area is this one of an unnamed Khoi chief whose people thrived in this part of South Africa some 300 years ago. Traces of an earlier people, often referred to as the first people, are found throughout the Karoo.
What we have here is a very nice example of an eland engraved by a San shaman or shaman, anything between 300 and several thousand years ago. We can tell that it's an eland by the hump on the shoulders here and the heavy forequarter, also the length of the horns. The eland was a very special antelope to the San people. They believed it contained great power or potency, and one can see how the person has actually made marks here. We call them peck marks, in order to try to extract potency from this image. This symbol is typical of what we call entoptic phenomena, which is the first stage of trance experience, what you see when you hallucinate. Interesting about this particular one is the similarity to your Nordic runes. For example, if you remove this half, you're left with a Scandinavian symbol for life.
Just outside Reinet is a prehistoric wonder, a valley of extraordinary beauty and solitude, known as the Valley of Desolation. It was formed by powerful volcanic and erosive forces millions of years ago. These precariously balanced columns of dolomite-capped shale rise more than 120 meters from the valley floor. The conical mountain Spandauwkop is a lonely sentinel in the midst of the Valley of Desolation, set against the timeless backdrop of the plains of Gondwanaland. When traveling through the Great Karoo, be prepared to meet up with its dominant domestic animals, merino sheep and Angora goats. And be patient, because these goats really know how to hog the road. To see these animals on their own turf, be sure to stay at one of the many Karoo farms that welcome visitors, such as this one at Wheatlands. This gracious twin-gabled home is situated on an extensive wool and mohair farm about 50 kilometers from Reinet. It's been in the possession of the same family for the past 150 years. For a different experience and a touch of warm Afrikaner hospitality, try Gondwanaland, a Karoo farm owned by Alec and Kobe Jeppy. Believe me, if you have any trouble getting to sleep at night, you can count the sheep till the cows come home. Make no mistake, the sheep are definitely the dominant animals on this farm. And feeding the lambs can be quite a demanding job. Kobe is not only a perfect hostess, she's a whiz at making delicious jams, pickles, and other bottled goodies. A common sight on the farm roads in the Karoo is the so-called karikimense, or cart people. These gypsy folk, who are employed as itinerant labourers to farmers in the area, are frequently on the move. I'm not getting back on there, she says. So it is now time for our director to step in and lend a hand. I feel much safer in the arms of my big sister. And so the party set off. Well, in a fashion. Well, it was also time for us to be on our way and see one of the rarest animals in the world. Outside Kraddock is one of the most beautiful national parks in South Africa, the Cape Mountain Zebra Park. It's here that this animal, virtually shot to extinction by European hunters in the 19th century, has been given sanctuary. The Cape Mountain zebra is the smallest of all the zebra family, standing a mere 1.2 meters high. The park is also home to a whole range of antelope. popular stopover at Cradock, named for Cape Governor Sir John Cradock, is a unique place called tuinhuise. These 19th century artisan cottages occupy both sides of the road and are decorated in Victorian and early Afrikaner styles. The owner, Sandra, is always happy to arrange a special treat for her guests at the historic Victoria Manor next to the tuinhuise. And what could be more entertaining than some traditional Xhosa singing and dancing? Right in the middle of the town, on Market Square, stands a church that looks as if it's the sister of a famous landmark in Trafalgar Square, London. In fact, this Dutch Reformed church, built in 1866, is a virtual replica of St. Martin's in the Field. This came about as the result of the minister's wife coming from London, and the architectural style was an antidote to her bouts of homesickness. Many are tempted to go in search of another quirk, only this one is a natural phenomenon called the Egg Rock, some 8 kilometers from Cradock. Precariously balanced on the side of the hill, it looks like some gigantic Humpty Dumpty waiting to fall. Of all the individuals to have come out of Cradock, the author Olive Schreiner is one of the most highly regarded. She's best known for her novel The Story of an African Farm. With the breakup of her family, Olive, at age 12, came to live with her brother and sister at number 9 Cross Street in Cradock. Her years at Cradock were marked by her intellectual growth and personal unhappiness, turning her increasingly to the world of books for company. Olive used to walk up and down in front of the house, muttering to herself as her lively imagination set about creating characters and dramatic situations. Although she attended the local Wesleyan church, during this period she began to reject Orthodox Christianity in favor of a free-thinking mysticism. She was also a strong supporter of the Boers and wrote critically of mining magnate and politician Cecil John Rhodes. The curator of the Olive Schreiner Museum introduced us to another aspect of Cradock life, or, more aptly, afterlife. The house where Paddy Orpin and her husband once stayed is reputedly haunted.
Well, I saw it twice, but to sort of confirm it and also prove to myself that I wasn't a bit mad, because I thought I was. A friend of mine was coming in here one day through the doorway, heading towards the sitting room over there, and a dark figure went past, and she was very surprised, so she didn't know there was anyone in there. Went in there to go and see who it was, and realized because there was no one in there, it must have been a ghost. I was outside at the time, and she then came out and told me about it. Where it had come from or who it was, I don't know. It was the same as the one I had seen. It was a male in dark clothing that had gone past the doorway, but we never ever managed to find out who it could possibly have been.
One of the most enigmatic characters to come out of the Karoo is the eccentric art lover Helen Martins, who lived in the small town of New Bethesda. When she was about 50, she started creating these cement statues, and in the process transformed her small property into a place of wonder. Helen used local craftsmen to construct the statues of her religious figures, who all face east, as if transfixed by some mystical power. This unusual woman had a love of birds, particularly the owl, which she regarded as a symbol of wisdom. World-renowned playwright Athol Fugard, who met Helen Martins 2 years before she died in 1976, was so inspired by the Owl House experience that he wrote a play called The Road to Mecca. Fugard, born in the Karoo, has been deeply inspired by its landscape.
I think there's something about this landscape that is just, from a writer's point of view, very inspiring. I mean, I have, and I still do it without any hesitation, describe the Karoo as, I think, the most, it sounds a bit fanciful, but that's the way I feel about it, the most spiritual of all South Africa's landscapes.
Another museum that keeps alive the spirit of one of its famous offspring is to be found at Beaufort West. It celebrates the life of Chris Barnard, who performed the world's first heart transplant operation. Barnard is affectionately remembered as the child of the Karoo. After a visit to the United States in the 60s, he brought back to South Africa this heart-lung machine. Next door to the museum is the old mission church where Barnard's father was minister. And next door to the church is the house where the famous heart surgeon was born. One of the guest lodges in Beaufort West was also frequented in earlier years by several famous characters, including Cecil John Rhodes, who is said to have slept in this bedroom, as well as the renowned explorer and missionary David Livingstone, who stopped over on his way to and from the interior during the 19th century. Whether residing or passing through the Great Karoo, there are few whose lives have not been influenced by this primordial landscape. It's an area of South Africa that never fails to surprise and inspire. And within its substrata, it will continue to unlock and reveal even more secrets about human evolution and existence. A truly marvelous and mystical world.